Business owners' biggest mistake. They think they're profitable just because their income statement says they are. But when they look at their bank account, it does not feel that way. Money comes in, money goes out, and somehow there's never as much left over as you think there should be. That disconnect is one of the most common and dangerous problems in small and mid-sized businesses. Because it makes people think the issue's effort or sales or discipline, when most of the time it's just the system and the way that it's set up. What I want to do in this video is walk through why profits and cash flow are not the same thing, why most businesses accidentally prioritize the wrong thing, and how a different way of structuring your money forces better decisions. It also forces longevity. I'm also going to talk about where this approach works well, where people misunderstand it, and how to think about applying it responsibly instead of treating it just as like any other hack. To understand why this matters, you have to start with how most businesses are taught to think about money. The basic formula is sales minus expense equals profit. You make money, you pay bills, and whatever's left, well, that's your profit. On paper, it makes perfect sense. In practice, it quietly trains you to treat profit like an afterthought. What actually happens with this? You open a business account, all the revenue goes in, all the expenses go out, payroll runs, vendors get paid, taxes get handled when they're due versus planning for them, which is a big mistake, and profit is what happens to be left, if at that point it's anything at all. The problem isn't that people are irresponsible, it's that humans adapt to the constraints they're given. If there's money in the account, it feels available. If there isn't, it feels like something went wrong, even if the business is technically profitable. I've lived this from multiple angles. As a CPA, I saw it constantly. Businesses that looked healthy on a financial statement, but they were always stressed about cash. As a gym owner, I felt this directly. Strong months on paper, followed by tight weeks where every decision felt reactive and I always wondered where the money was. And later, running large operations, I saw how the same pattern shows up at scale, just with bigger numbers and more complexity. The core issue is that cash flow is about timing and behavior. It's not just a math problem to be solved. Profit is an opinion on a report. Cash is what keeps your business alive. You can be profitable and you can still run out of cash. You can also survive for a while without profit as long as the cash keeps moving. And that gap's where a lot of businesses get in trouble. Mike Michalowicz coined the profit first approach, which I highly recommend you read his book. His idea flips the traditional formula. Instead of sales minus expenses equaling profit, it treats profit as something you set aside intentionally, and then you force the business to operate on what's left. In other words, sales minus profit equals expenses. That sounds simple, but the impact is mostly psychological and behavioral. When you remove profit from the general pool of money, you can change the entire decision-making environment. Expenses no longer expand automatically to match revenue. You're forced to ask whether a cost is truly necessary, whether timing matters, and whether growth is actually healthy or just expensive. This works because businesses behave like people. If you give yourself a fixed amount to live on, you figure it out. If your income goes up, your lifestyle always inflates and you still feel broke no matter how much money you're bringing in. This same thing happens inside companies. Expense creep isn't usually malicious, it's gradual, it's rationalized, it feels justified in isolation. But over time, it eats away at everything and leaves you feeling stuck. So one thing I want to slow down and clarify is that this isn't about starving the business, it's not about pretending that expenses don't exist. It's simply about sequencing. Profit first forces you to acknowledge that profit is not a reward you get later if things go well. It's a requirement from day one for a business to be sustainable. If the business can't function while producing some level of profit, that is a signal. It's not a failure. Where people sometimes get this wrong is treating the system like it's just a trick. They hear, take profit first, and assume it's about pulling money out aggressively, regardless of the context. That is not the point. The point is visibility and constraint. You're separating your money into multiple different buckets so you can see reality more clearly and you can make better decisions and make them earlier. Another misunderstanding is thinking that this replaces financial literacy or planning. It doesn't. You still need to know your numbers, know your profits, know your expenses. You need to understand margins, seasonality, debt obligations, and growth requirements. The system just makes it harder to lie to yourself and frankly makes it harder to make a mistake without knowing you're making it. Cash flow problems don't show up at once. They show up as a stress. You delay a hire, you push off a tax payment, you tell yourself, oh, I'll figure it out next month. I need to sell more, I need to market better. Then you just get used to operating that way. And over time, the business becomes dependent on a constant inflow just to stay upright. It shouldn't work that way. Because at that point, growth is not exciting. It feels stressful. It feels like a necessity versus the joy of running the business and growing it. A structured cash system interrupts that cycle. When profit, taxes, owner's pay, and operating expenses are separated, you can see where the pressure is really coming from. Sometimes revenue is not your problem. The expenses are, because you're not taking profit. So it could be pricing, payroll timing, or debt service that no longer fits the size of the business. Without this separation, everything blurs together and every problem feels like a sales problem. You just need more and more and more. From an operator's perspective, the biggest benefit I've seen is decision quality. When operating expenses are constrained, decisions get sharper. You ask better questions, you plan purchases, you negotiate differently. You stop just assuming that by growing, you're gonna clean up all the problems of today. It doesn't mean you never invest. It doesn't mean you give back to your business. It means you invest with intention. There are times when it makes sense to run thinner margins to build capacity or enter a new market. The difference here is that you're choosing that trade-off consciously, not just stumbling into it because the account happened to have money in it and you just felt like spending it. If you're thinking about how this applies to your situation, start being honest about your constraints. How predictable is revenue? How seasonal is business? How much flexibility do you actually have in your expenses? A service business with stable recurring revenue can implement this much more aggressively than a project-based business with long payment cycles. The principles still apply, but the percentages and timing have to be realistic. And frankly, you have to plan your business. You also have to understand that this is not a one-time fix. This is a habit, a recurring habit, quarterly, monthly, annually. First few months are gonna feel uncomfortable because you're confronting things that you used to ignore or just didn't think about because there was money in the account. But that discomfort is information, it's learning. It's showing you where the business has been relying on optimism instead of structure. And over the long run, the fundamentals don't change. A healthy business produces profit, it pays its obligations on time, and it generates enough cash to make decisions instead of reacting to them. Tools like Profit First can help reinforce the fundamentals, but they do not replace responsibility. They do not replace discipline, and they also don't replace the need to think long-term, especially when things are going well. The real takeaway here is that profit is not what happens after everything else works out. It becomes part of the design. When you treat it that way, cash flow stops being a mystery and it starts becoming something you can actually manage and predict. If this helped clarify how you think about money in your business, subscribe to our channel. Put out videos like this to help operators think more clearly about decisions that compound over time. And if you want to go deeper, leave a comment and let me know what part of your business you're trying to get more control over. Until then, see you next time.